Legends car with the Scooby-Doo Mystery Machine.
What was it?
It's a little bit of a Legends car.
Oh, okay.
It's a North Star, yeah.
It made me think of the HHR SS in the duck hunt. We had a big autocross fire team. There must have been a dozen of them. All of them at once. When you doing this across the parking lot, if you stood back, they had all these brightly colored HHR SSs going like this on the park. Crazy. They love it. If it even went a whole year, because that was right when the bankruptcy stuff was starting to happen, and to show good faith, GM just plain shop, kind of like shop design. Sure, you had to do something for the good stuff like that.
I think good. Ready?
What do you want to do?
Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of Grassroots Motorsports Live, presented by CRC Industries. I'm JG Pasterjack. Welcome to Ormond Beach, Florida once again. It's another Wednesday night. It is January 17th. Cooling off here again in Florida, but we hope that wherever you're watching from tonight, you are doing well, you are staying warm, you are hanging out with us this evening, and we really appreciate it. Before we get started, do me a favor. Before we got started, actually, while we were running our pre-roll, I went to my very own phone here. I went to our video on Facebook, hit that share button, and let everybody know that we were on, we were doing stuff, we were having a good time tonight. If you're watching us on YouTube, you can hit that little subscribe button down there. If you're watching us on Facebook, throw us a like, throw us a share, and we appreciate it. So, I already got some of our regulars on tonight. Our friends from Autobooks Aerobooks are on. Of course, Autobooks Aerobooks, one of the proud sponsors of this show. We got a cool Corvette book coming up to plug for them later. In the meantime, you can check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com. And of course, you can check out our friends at CRC at crcindustries.com. Before the show, as always, we use a bunch of CRC stuff to make sure our Steadicam is not squeaking, to make sure our screens are clean. 15,000 different products those guys make for all your automotive and cleaning and lubricating and just general maintenance needs. Great stuff. We've been fans of them longer than they've been fans of us, and we're happy to have them on board. Folks, speaking of things we are happy to have on board, it is a great honor and privilege to bring our guest on tonight. It is, if you guys have read the magazine for a while, if you've ever read any of my project car stuff, you know that personally and professionally, I am a Corvette fan. I'm excited to have another Corvette project in the shop here. I'm a former owner of a 99 fixed roof coupe. Just always really, really dug the cars and dug what's going on with them. So having said that, it is a phenomenal pleasure and honor to introduce Mr. John Heinricy right over here. Come on over, John. Come say hi. Welcome to Florida, man.
Howdy, good to be here in 30-degree weather.
Yeah, I know. Well, you're from Michigan, so
yeah, I know what it's like.
Yeah. So John Heinricy, for those of you not familiar, if you don't know the name, and if not, shame on you, but started your career at GM 1970. Yeah, exactly, 1970. Yeah. Was chief engineer of the Corvette program for nearly a decade.
Not exactly chief engineer, no. I was,
okay. Well, we were discussing this earlier.
Yeah.
Right? Co-chief engineer or
I was
whatever.
A development manager. I was worked with the chief engineer a lot, so I did a lot of different things. I spent a lot of time at the proving grounds, working on developing the car, and then starting in about 1991, I think it would be, I became responsible for the C4, and I took that through the rest of its production while Dave Hill switched his emphasis onto the C5, working on the C5. So I did all the C4 from about 91 on through 96.
And then from the Corvette program, you went into vehicle dynamics, and then
I did the
just sort of the
Camaro and
Corvette
Firebird for a
yeah.
couple of years, 98 through 2002, finished those up, so I was chief engineer on those two cars up to that time.
And a lot of other cool niche cars that wouldn't exist without you, like the Solstice ZOK.
Well,
And
depends on how far back you want to go.
and we were talking before the show about, well, let's start back from the beginning. You come on to GM 1970, as I'm assuming your training was engineering, because you don't
Right.
really get an engineering job without, it's hard to fake your way into that. What were some of the first projects you were working on there as a junior engineer?
Well, I just think about some of my experiences when I got there. So I had to get trained, and we had a 2-year training program at GM at that time, and I did some drafting work. Actually, back then, drafting was on a board with a pencil and scales and all that kind of thing. So I did some of that. But the really coolest project I got, I think it was only about 6 months, and I got assigned in Chevrolet R&D. Now at that time, Chevy R&D was inside the Chevrolet engineering area. It had this closed wall, no windows anywhere, combination lock on the door that very few people knew the lock and how to get in this place. And you go in there, and there's people working on Can-Am race engines and Trans Am stuff for the Trans Am series and Can-Am series back in the 70s. So, 509 aluminum big blocks and all that kind of stuff.
Wow.
So that was pretty cool. So you had to have something to keep your blood boiling when there's low compression engines coming out in cars.
Well, yeah, because this was early 70s. And
130 horsepower Corvettes or whatever they were at that time.
Things were already not heading in a great direction. You were coming out of a performance boom, but things were starting to change a little bit.
Big change.
Going into that job, what were you? The day they sat you down, did they say, "John, welcome aboard. Everything's changing and getting slower and choked down, and it's your job to make sure it doesn't completely suck"?
Obviously, the bulk of cars at GM still at that time were, things for people to get around, transportation vehicles. So most of what you worked on were transportation vehicles. Not very many people worked on performance vehicles at that time. So I came in and I was working on regular transportation things. One of my first assignments was the beginning of the Citation. So I started working on the Citation, first front wheel drive program like that at GM, other than the really big cars.
And we were talking earlier, we're huge fans of these sort of orphan performance cars and these unloved. You were basically the godfather of the Citation X11, which was the performance version of the Citation. And not just a couple of stripes and a hood scoop. I mean, this thing's had fiberglass hoods and different
cold air induction.
Yeah,
at
and
that
different.
Time, nobody had that kind of thing. Cold air cowl induction on the car.
And a whole different gear ratio setup.
Gear ratios. Engine had different cam and heads and compression ratio, and obviously big tires and wheels, and had to do things with the brakes and obviously all the suspension tuning. So did a lot of stuff on the car.
And I was surprised to find out because that, to me, that car has all the markings of a car that the engineers somehow sneak past the bosses. But they came to you looking to develop a high-performance Citation.
Well, the engineers came to me to develop a high-performance Citation, not marketing or sales. So we got started on the development and did the development, and then it kind of got sold to marketing that this was a car they could do and put in production.
So what did that whole package include? How much better was it than a regular Citation? When you saw the Citation, were you like, oh God, I can't do anything with this, or was there potential there?
Well, I knew there was potential because of the engine. I mean, that was a sweetheart little pushrod V6, very light, very small, and so I knew that was pretty darn capable. At the time, it was
2.8 liter.
Yeah, 2.8 liter, and as soon as they did a cam, as soon as we got a cam in it, the thing would rev to 7,000.
Wow.
So didn't even have a rev limiter. So you could rev it to 7,000, and the thing was making 135 horsepower in a car that weighed 2,400 to 2,600 pounds at that time. So it was pretty quick.
What was the engineering knowledge base like on fast front wheel drive cars at the time? Because they're
zip.
Yeah, I mean, you had the VW Rabbit, you had the Mini, but
that's the best you could do is get in a Rabbit, which was a pretty damn good car to get into. Yeah, so we really didn't have anything to go on.
So that was a strut car in the front, right?
Correct. Yeah.
And what, just a beam axle in the back?
Yep, just a regular
okay, so like
axle.
a Rabbit, basically.
Yeah.
So did you have to basically go in and kind of kind of figure out all the math and all the engineering to make a good handling front-wheel drive car?
For the most part, for me to do that personally, I didn't have to do that. I had a great vehicle dynamicist, John Carrier, who you might know the name.
Oh, wow.
Great
Yeah,
autocrosser.
okay.
John Carrier was a vehicle dynamicist at that time at GM and continued on a job like that as an expert for the rest of his career. But he had already done some front-wheel drive car on a Buick, some front-wheel drive performance work on a Buick, and I can remember it was a car, I think it was a car that never came out.
Really?
So it was a front-wheel drive, smaller front-wheel drive Buick that he had done tire work and suspension work on. So he had a base of knowledge there that he could help me with developing this car. So that was where I got my math help.
So after that was developed, you didn't really join the Corvette team until sort of the beginning of the C4 program. What was between
83.
the
Between
citation?
there would have been Monte Carlo SS.
Okay. Oh, wow.
So,
Okay.
yeah, that and the Fastback, which came in '87. I did that kind of as a side for another project.
And there was a lightning rod version of that too, wasn't there? Or was that the Buick that had the lightning rods?
So the Buick was
old,
obviously the
or the Grand National.
Grand
Sorry,
National.
the Oldsmobile
And then-
maybe.
yeah, and then Pontiac had the Aero Coupe.
So
Right.
those cars, those
And
Jeep.
actually the Eurosport.
Oh,
Eurosport Celebrity
That's
too.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. Which and somebody built a GT1 version of that at some point. There was a
Yeah.
GT1 bodied Celebrity that existed.
Yeah, I can't even remember who did that.
Yeah.
Crazy.
So
But then I got
Yeah.
on Corvette.
yeah. So and what's that day like when you find out, okay, now I'm going over to this team that is this sort of iconic brand.
I tell you, I was kind of flabbergasted. I had no thought that I would even go work on the Corvette at that time. I'd been doing these things like the Citation and the Monte Carlo SS was probably the last thing before that, and I had no idea that I might get working on the Corvette. And it was just one of those things. One day, a guy comes to me and says, "We think we'd like to have you work on the Corvette and be the development manager of the Corvette."
Wow.
I'm like, really? Yeah. Okay, if I say yes, can I have it?
So,
And okay, just like that, it was done.
so how quickly what's the reality of that at that point? I mean, you're in charge of this brand that's got all these expectations aligned with it and all this sort of emotion behind it. Is that intimidating? Is it exciting? Are you
Probably the thing that wasn't intimidating about it, that made it not intimidating for me, is that I knew the people who were working on
Okay.
it. So there is kind of a cult at the proving grounds in particular for people who do ride and handling work. And if you're working on something that's performance oriented, all the others kind of come around and kind of see what you're doing and know what you're doing. And so same way with the Corvette. So I worked some with the Corvette engineers. Even before I was ever a development manager, one of the guys there, like Rick Darling, was a development engineer on the Corvette. And we were friends, and he'd come and get me to come drive the Corvette with him and take a drive in it and see what it was like and kind of get an idea of where he was in the development of it. So I knew those guys pretty well. And then when I came in and became the manager and headed the group, first thing that happens is Rick Darling shows up and lays a book on my desk and says, "You got to read this before you can do anything." And it was the right stuff.
So no pressure,
Right.
obviously. Yeah, no pressure.
Right.
So when you come onto the Corvette team, the C4 you came on in '83.
Yeah.
So the C4 existed. It was coming out as the '84.
Right.
205 horsepower crossfire injection. But we look back at those cars now and they seem a little raw and a little rough. But what a substantial difference from what it had just come from, obviously. But what was your first impression on getting there and saying, okay, here's the car I'm in charge of now? What are you thinking?
Yeah, I tell you, I drove them and I said, well, the one thing they were really good at doing was putting the numbers down. Look at the kind of G's they would pull and that kind of stuff on a skid pad, get them on a road course, pretty darn good. But from a practical standpoint, as a livable, drivable car every day, there was a lot of work to do in the ride and handling department. So I felt like I really had my work cut out for me to get that straightened out. So that was my whole goal was, I know the car can do this on the track, but it's not a nice enough car to drive every day. So I've got to keep what's there, even make it better on the track, but get it to be a car that was a nice car on the track. And at the same time, you've got port fuel injection being worked on it,
Right.
485. So we right away we're working on prototypes and getting the port fuel injection engine into them, which added 30, 40 horsepower, some 30 horsepower I think it was at the time, and a lot better. And then worked the chassis with it, tires and wheels, chassis tuning, everything like that to get it to come around. And Rick and Larry Fletcher was working on it at the time too, and those guys did a fantastic job with tuning the car. You know, I just kind of set the goals the way I wanted. And I was always a hands-on person who I drove like every day. It wasn't like go work on this for 6 months and then bring it back to me and let's take a ride and see how it is. I was out there every day, getting into the car with them and that kind of thing, and helping guide it the way I thought it needed to be.
So with a car like a Corvette, that sort of is a performance benchmark. Are you just so we're friends with all the guys that worked on the original Miata prototypes, you know, that developed that, and one thing they always talk about is when they were developing those cars from the ground up, every day they had Miatas and MGBs and Alpha, or they didn't have Miatas, they had it's that's how ubiquitous they've become now that we mentioned it, but they had MGBs and Alphas and midgets, and they would go drive them and they would take them apart and put them together, and that's what they were using both for their development and their sort of inspiration. With are you guys driving comparative models every day? Are you just
we had in our fleet at that time? We had a Testarossa.
Okay.
We had a Lotus S3 Turbo, and I'm starting to have a mental block on these cars back then. We had like 5 cars that were
probably some 911 variant in there.
Yep.
So these are big targets. These are world-class targets.
Yep. Oh, a Lamborghini Countach.
Wow. Okay, so
right, a Countach.
Real big targets.
Yeah.
And obviously, you guys were even at that point a third the price of those cars. What did it feel like every year you were coming closer and closer to those goals, or exceeding
like
some of those?
We made some really big improvements. You know, if you look at cars once you got up into after the C4, there haven't been as many changes. If you look at the C6, there maybe weren't as many individual changes year to year. There were models that came out, but on the C4, it seemed like every year we had something going on. Every year we had engine, transmission, you know, tires, you name it, shocks, something significant technically coming damn near every year on the car.
Somebody asked a question. I seem to remember seeing this car in one of the magazines, but yeah, wasn't there there was an LT1 powered Buick Roadmaster or Impala wagon that you guys had built as a chase vehicle or something?
We had an Impala wagon that we used as a chase vehicle that had a prototype port fuel injection engine in it. So we took when the prototypes we were done using the prototypes, we took the engine and drivetrain out of one of the prototype Corvettes and put it into this, what we called a B wagon, a Caprice wagon, and that became our chase vehicle.
Wow.
The thing would go 140 miles an hour. Not that I ever drove it that way.
Yeah. So this whole time you're making improvements on the C4 line, you're also, as soon as the C4 came out, you guys sort of started conceptually on the C5 as well. So how much energy gets devoted to improving the current model? What's going into the next model? Because it seems like with the way a life cycle of a Corvette is, especially when you guys first conceived of the C5, we didn't even have access to a lot of the technology that eventually got used in this car.
Well, we had a group of people that I had that spent their time on the production car, on the C4, making improvements on it, tuning it year to year, whether we had little changes coming where they'd be tires. Remember, we went to ABS brakes on the car, so we had to change the suspension geometry to a zero scrub car when we went to...
Which was 86?
86.
Yeah.
So we went to a zero scrub car, and we wanted to add a lot more caster to the car for stability. So those were pretty big changes to make. And then we changed the rear suspension geometry too, pretty dramatically, and I think it was 88. So those kind of things going on. So we've got brakes and ABS brakes, significant stuff. Early traction control and stability we were working on at that time.
Oh, wow.
These were, even though I call it the carryover car kinds of stuff, these were pretty big technology kinds of things. Selective ride shocks where you had cockpit adjustable Bilsteins that we used on the car.
And then it got an LT1
Yep,
eventually.
and then LT1 with a new engine. So we had that new engine plus all the traction control and stability came in right around 92 also. So
And-
plus the ZR1.
Well, yeah. So where did this was the ZR1 planned from the beginning, or was some sort of King of the Hill
I'm
type?
sure there wasn't a real good plan that everybody knew about, but Dave Hill always had, or Dave McClellan always had a plan for something like that. So he really had a plan to take the car a lot further. So as soon as we were working on the C4 when I got there, we already started working on bigger tires for the car. You know, and we had like 305 tires on like 85 cars.
Oh, wow.
Prototypes. We were running, you know, Goodyear 305s on the car as a test and developing that way. We were developing, one of my guys who was working on SLA rear suspension instead of the multi-link that's there now. So we had a guy working on that. We worked on four-wheel steer on it, plus the active suspension. So we had active suspension stuff going on too for the active cars that were going to be in production in 1990. I think that was scheduled for production, and we never did it. We canceled it.
Now, have leaf springs? Has anybody ever raised their hand and said, "Hey, can we put coils on this thing?" Or is that part of the Corvette?
Well, I wouldn't say it's part of the Corvette, but there's so many advantages to the coil springs on the car that it'd be hard to say why would you go a different direction. They're lighter. They allow you to have lighter, smaller stabilizer bars to do the same job that you would have to have a bigger stabilizer bar on for. So those kind of compromises are better.
Is that because
the CG is lower?
So is that because they actually transfer some of the load from one side to the other with
so
the
the
leaf?
spring actually, depending on how you design that leaf spring going across the car, and it's all about how far it is between the rails. You know, where the spring comes like this and attaches to the rails. Right. How far that is depends on how much of a stabilizer bar that spring acts like. If you think about the old C2s, had a leaf spring in the rear and they were mounted right like this, so there was no transfer from side to side. They were solid mounted in the middle, and all you had was a leaf on the side, so that was just a spring.
Right.
But when you do it this way, where the leaf can swoop down and up over like this, now you get some load transfer out of that.
Okay.
So your stabilizer bar doesn't have to be big enough or bigger. So it's lighter, lower CG. Packaging is easier. Makes it easier to package more tire and wheel in the fender. So
keeps the hood line lower.
Lots of advantages to do it, especially when you've got a front engine car taking up a lot of room there too.
Okay. So I'm sure. Does marketing ever try and chase you guys off of that? Hey, can't we get with the program, or is it just this is working great? Let's not screw with it.
It works great, and there's not a good reason to not do it. Plus, if you think about when you try to package smaller springs, typically the fatigue of the springs causes the spring to sag over time, and these, the leaf springs don't sag over time. If you want springs that don't sag over time, that are coil springs, they need to be about that big and about that tall, like you have in a passenger car. And if you're doing an exotic car, you don't quite have to worry about that so much. But if you've got a Corvette that people are going to potentially put 100,000 miles or more on, you've got to worry about that.
So there is sort of the perception, and the reality of these cars is, even though you guys were shooting at Ferrari and Lamborghini and Porsche, this is kind of a blue-collar car. These are accessible performance cars. Is
a lot of value in it.
Yeah, and a lot of performance for the money. And I think with the C5, it really sort of became a world-class car. But is there the temptation ever to just throw the book at the thing and go nuts, or are you purposely sort of making decisions to say, okay, this needs to be producible, this needs to be mass producible, this needs to be accessible? How does that sort of spirit
I'd say that
figure
spirit feeds a lot into it.
Yeah.
I think if you looked at something like where you said, could you throw everything you had at it? That would be an active suspension car.
Okay.
In like 1990, where you had, you have a dual overhead cam V8 in the car. That's a lot more expensive, and you're throwing quite a bit at it. Active suspension, there wasn't such a thing. So developing a brand new thing, except in racing, that's the only place you'd ever seen that. And more often over the last 30 years, you've seen something happen in production on street cars, and then it goes into a race car versus the other way around. So here you are looking at active suspension, which was very, very sophisticated and incredibly capable at the time, and very complicated. So that was throwing a lot at the car, and of course I didn't make it.
So we'll get into C5 stuff here in a minute. Somebody asked a question about after we had talked about the V8 wagon, or the SS wagon. about other sort of parts bin specials or dead end development mules. We talked about a couple of those before the show.
Well, C4, certainly some of them that I'm very familiar with was we had twin turbo V6s.
Oh,
So
wow.
we were actually looking at like the what would have been a version of the 4.3 liter
Okay.
iron V6 at the time. We had a twin turbo version of that we were working at seriously for the Corvette. We couldn't make as much power with that reliably as we really wanted. We went to a twin turbo V8. You'll see a couple of twin turbo V8s in the museum that are relics of that time in the mid 80s when Dave McClellan was really pushing, too many Daves. Dave McClellan was really pushing for this King of the Hill kind of Corvette, and twin turbo V8 was another way to do that. Now that ended up getting shelved, and the double overhead cam LT5 was the result of that. So we went from the regular V8 to the twin turbo V6 to the twin turbo V8 and then to the double overhead cam LT5. And of course you never saw those twin turbos in production.
Well, but
other than with Callaway.
Yeah, the aftermarket scene. So
Callaway.
was Callaway able to share some of your technology with that, or was that a completely parallel, separate development?
There was some powertrain involvement with Callaway.
Okay.
Yeah.
And yeah, I know there were a couple of tuners that were starting to look at turbo stuff then, but was it just a matter of the engine control technology wasn't quite there yet to make that feasible, or?
I think the electronics and that kind of thing just wasn't quite there to do what we wanted to do.
Okay.
And I think the engine group was a little bit nervous about doing that because I think it would have taken them a lot longer to develop something like that than what we had at the time, because we just didn't have that much experience with it.
So let's talk about C5 here a little bit, because when you came on board, you were handed a car that existed, but you were also handed the instructions that this car is getting replaced someday, and this is what it's getting replaced with. So when you come in and start working on what the next Corvette is going to be, I can't imagine, how big of a project that is. Are you given rough targets? Are you given firm directives? How much leeway do you have in defining?
We kind of in the Corvette engineering and marketing have a lot tighter relationship, I think, than in a lot of the other vehicles. So there wasn't something like marketing coming to engineering and saying this is what we want for the next car. Engineering kind of defined the car, and then marketing would work together with us to fine tune it to make sure it was doing what they wanted for their customer. But when it came to the heart, the way the car was configured and that kind of thing, totally engineering. That was totally done there, and that would have been started. I actually had a marketing assignment back in from '85 to '90 where I was working in marketing, and the last 3 years I was there, I was responsible for the Camaro and the Corvette at Chevrolet, and so I did quite a bit of work with the Corvette team at that time. Working on the initial stuff on the C5.
Okay.
And one of the big things that we were trying to do, especially McClellan was pushing for this, was to make a convertible that had good structure, because every car you drove that was a convertible typically, they felt like a loose noodle going down the road when they did a bump. And he really wanted to have a car with good structure, and that kind of drove us to what you find in the C5 that you see all the way through C5, C6, and C7 included, is what we call the structural tunnel. That's the big side rails with a lot of structure tied into the side rails at the front and the back, and the whole structural tunnel all the way back that just has the tunnel trim over it, and that's what gives you that really good structure torsionally in the car. And the beams give you a lot of beaming structure, so you don't get the shake this way, and the tunnel tying the beams together makes the torsion really stiff.
Yeah,
so if it's good in a convertible and then you put a top on it, it's going to be really good as a coupe.
And it's amazing to see one of these things as a body in white, because the actual structure under there is huge. I mean, it's a substantial portion of the car, and then you start looking and you realize, like, oh, this is just one giant single piece of metal that's been, sort of folded and sculpted into this. So I can see where all that stiffness came from. So that was, and especially,
and then we developed, you see the big closeout tunnel on the tunnel.
Yeah.
Below, it's got like 64 bolts on it or something.
Yeah.
There, holding it in.
Oh, so that's a structural.
Oh, big. Yeah, that's the only reason it's there.
Okay. So
it's not to make a place to store candy or anything like that. Hide your liquor when you cross the border Mexico.
So when I do the clutch, I need to make sure to put all those bolts back in.
Yeah.
I'm imagining. So and coming from the C4 especially, which was a really really stiff car, and stiff ride-wise, not necessarily torsionally stiff, and actually probably eventually suffered from a lot of squeaks and rattles, and because it was kind of a loose car with a very tight suspension.
Mm-hmm.
So was that sort of your guiding principle? Like, we need to make this thing stronger and beefier?
You always would take the car you're replacing, take that car and say, what are the areas you want to make improvements on? And you'd go through and make a very extensive list of all the areas you want to make an improvement on the next version, and that kind of becomes a Bible as to where you want to make the improvements, and then what are the new technologies you can bring into the new car that'll help you do those things.
Gotcha. All right, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll start looking at some specific stuff on here. Want to let everybody out there know Daytona is coming. And you're here for the 24-hour, right?
I'll be over there.
Yeah, we're going to have
anyway.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll have our big tent set up. We are right on the Midway, right adjacent to Lake Lloyd. If you've got one of our Grassroots Motorsports Experience tickets, we cannot wait to see you there. If you have one of our stadium tickets, you are welcome to come and hang out in the tent just the same. If you've got just a regular Daytona ticket, you can absolutely come and hang out in the big GRM party tent. Get out of the wind, get out of the hopefully there's not rain, but get out of the wind and cold. Come hang out. There's always cool stuff going on. Maybe John Heinricy will come visit, sign a few Corvette valve covers. We're also going to have really, really awesome stuff going on all weekend. We've got tours. We've got a paddock tour that's at 10 o'clock on Friday. Let me double check and make sure I am telling you guys the right information here. 10 a.m. Friday, we're doing a paddock tour before the Continental race. Doing a midnight tour on Saturday. First 50 people at that midnight tour are, it's awesome. First 50 people are going to get Mazda swag, and we're going to be checking out a private tour of the Yost Mazda paddock Saturday night, and we'd love to have you. Oh, also, if you are a GRM ticket holder, we have these golden ticket things that we give out. We get opportunities throughout the weekend to do cool stuff, and we find somebody with one of our tickets and bring them with us. And we don't know exactly what those are, but in the past it's been stuff like, hey, do you want to come up to the starter stand and hang out for 20 minutes and watch these race cars go by? Or do you want to go for a ride in the pace car the next time it goes out? Or do you want to go up to the IMSA mission control room? Or do you want to go to the driver's meeting and sit there with all of these famous faces who are competing in the Rolex 24 at Daytona? So if you are a GRM ticket holder, you are eligible for those, and they just kind of happen at random. But maybe we'll we'll give you some good Instagram fodder that weekend. Also, check out our friends at CRC Industries, folks. CRCIndustries.com, proud supporter of this show. They are proudly. Actually, my display is getting a little bit thin back there because I keep using everything. I keep grabbing stuff off of my display rack to actually use, and I need to be better about leaving display stuff up there. But it's so good that when it's right there, I can't resist using it. We have been fans of CRC stuff for decades. We use their stuff on all of our project cars. So if you are reaching for automotive chemicals at a store, folks, and you're reaching for the CRC stuff, you know that you're getting a great product, but you're also getting a product from a company that supports the world that we do cool stuff in, that world of amateur and professional motorsports. Also, go to Autobooks, Aerobooks. We got a cool book for you tonight written by our other good Corvette friend, Mr. Peter Brock. He was one of the designers of the C2 Corvette, and he has written a book about his experiences in the Corvette program.
I've just started reading it because
have you really?
Because he signed a copy and gave me a copy at when he went in the Hall of Fame.
Oh, very cool.
National Corvette Museum.
So a recommendation right here for very the. Cool. And I didn't even know that when we threw the Pete Brock book up there. So help our friend Peter out, and we will. And also speaking of auto books, if you're ever in Southern California and you do not go and check out the scene there, they are not only a fantastic repository of reading material, they are a hub of automotive culture in Southern California. So check them out at autobooks-aerobooks.com. All right, got a couple of questions for John that we want to get to before they disappear off of here. So in fact, the gentleman that I bought this car from, and I did not know this, used to own a Cobalt SS, and you were
How about that?
one of the principals in that car. And when we look at your racing history too, you've won, and I got it wrong. I posted that you won 11 championships. You won 13 SCCA national championships, but everything from GT1 cars to showroom stock C cars.
Right. And
So-
now and now even slower than that.
And B-spec, yeah.
B-spec, yeah.
So, so literally from, what GT1 is usually either the second or third fastest, sometimes the fastest class during a
Yeah.
weekend, to B-spec. I can't imagine anything going slower than
It is
B-spec.
nothing going slower.
So, tell us about your racing career. Had you always been? Did you get into motorsports from your work with GM, or were you a motorsports guy that happened to get a cool job?
I was really a hot rod nut
Okay.
in the at home in South Dakota. If you can be a hot rod nut in South Dakota in the 50s and 60s, I was. But I didn't pay any attention to racing other than some drag racing back at that time. I went to some early drag races in the 60s in South Dakota at the new and only drag strip there, Thunder Valley drag strip.
Oh, wow.
in South Dakota. And so I went to a couple races there. But by the time I got to GM, I hardly knew of such a thing as road racing or autocrossing for that matter. I'd never been to an SCCA race, never knew what they did. But I just loved to drive. I drove fast all the time, and so I was a real enthusiast. I didn't even attempt to get a license in SCCA until I was 37.
Wow.
So I'd never driven in a race until I was 37. And at that time I got my license and I drove a Citation X11,
Yeah.
the first year of racing. And I was fortunate enough to get to know Tommy Morris and Dick Gullstrand before that. And Dick, I told him how much I wanted to drive, and he encouraged me to do it, and so he was the reason I got my license. And then after I got my license and did a few club racing events, Dick and Tommy were gracious enough to put me in the car and help develop the car and actually let me race in professional racing in Corvette.
Well, yeah,
That
and
kind of got it all started.
yeah, and when we, I mean, if we were just talking about your successes as a driver, you'd still be on the show. I mean, it would still, yeah. So the success that you've had both as a development guy and as a driver have been impressive. But just as impressive as that is, I remember last year at the Dixie Tour, I pull up to the starting line in my Mustang, right, and here's John Heinricy at Autocross. He's waving people off at the start. So you're still involved in motorsports, and not just at the high end, but you're out running autocross stuff as well, too.
Yeah, I've always enjoyed, once I got into doing some autocross, and that started with the X11 too, because I developed the car, and I was looking for something to do with it, coming right down to it, because I didn't really know about road racing and SCCA. I didn't know what really went on there other than the pro stuff like Trans Am and Can-Am. And I asked the guy I was working for at that time if it was okay for me to take a company car out and try it in some autocrossing, and I went out and tried it, and the car performed really good.
Wow.
I won the class, and that kind of got the whole thing started. And then also if you knew who Ralph Kramer was director of communications at Chevrolet at the time. He called me up and he said, hey, do you know much about SCCA club racing? I said, no. He said, well, they're racing the Citations there and they're winning with them. And I said, really? It was kind of like that. Really? I didn't know that.
This car that I had built as a factory hot rod
Yeah, I did not know that
is
it
getting
was being
used
for that.
Wow.
So he told me, he told me that, and then he actually got from SCCA the records of all the races that year, and I poured through them and found out where the Citations were being raced. And the closest was Dr. Bob McConnell in Dayton, Ohio. And so I called him up. I found out his number and called him up and said, hey, I hear you're racing a Citation. And that kind of got the whole thing going. And so
what did
I
he
started
say
working
when you were like, oh yeah, I designed the car? No, they just wanted to chat for a while.
Yeah, well, basically, yeah, I worked
Yeah.
on it at GM, and I wanted to chat and see how
Yeah.
you're doing. Is anything going wrong? What's working? What isn't working? That kind of thing. And
That's
so
cool.
I really got into a lifelong friendship with Bob McConnell over
Yeah.
that.
So let's fast forward. We're going to skip a couple of things here. We'll come back to, but we'll fast forward to this car a little bit, because if I'm not mistaken, You took one of these '04 commemorative editions around the Nurburgring under 8 minutes at some point.
Yeah.
Was that the first Corvette to go
Yeah, I think it
under
was,
8 minutes?
Yeah, it wasn't even a commemorative edition. It was
Just
just
a-
regular Z06.
Okay.
Yeah.
So when, obviously the
And
Nurburgring...
that was the first time for a Corvette under 8. Yeah. We actually had back earlier than that, Dave McClellan, again, had a desire to go under 8. And we thought a ZR1 would go under 8. And we kind of got started in that direction. And what put a halt to that was the Golf 4.
Okay.
So that we were planning on doing that. We're planning on for the '92 press show with the LT1s, when the LT1s came out and you had the new bodywork on the regular Corvette, we were going to do a sub 8-minute lap at the Nurburgring as part of that press show. So we were going to do the press show in Europe, going to go to the Nurburgring, and we were going to do a sub 9 or sub 8 with the ZR1. So we kind of headed down that path, but the Golf 4 kind of
Yeah,
took
yeah.
that all away. And so then, and because of that, it was basically 7 years later than that before we ever went back to the ring again.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
So, and I mean, Chevy has a facility over there now.
yeah. GM does.
Or GM does.
Yeah, it was with Opel, and now it's all GM US.
So is that, how important of a benchmark is that for manufacturers? I mean, it's a weird arbitrary thing, but it seems like it's even in the last 5-6 years become much more of a yardstick for people.
I really think that GM put the Nurburgring on the map. I really think they did. And I would look at the performance cars. The Corvette wouldn't be what the Corvette is today. The Cadillac Vs wouldn't be what the Cadillac Vs are. The SSs wouldn't be what the SSs were without the Nurburgring. That kind of was the what I'd call the catalyst for making it all happen. Not that you couldn't have done it some other way, but the fact that you went there and you now are kind of in competition with all these other cars that are going to the Nurburgring and you haven't been doing it.
Yeah.
That was the catalyst that really got, I'd say, the real sauce going in the cars. Got them to be developed to really be that good on the track, that good on the street. Without that, it would have taken a lot longer to happen.
Cool. So walk us through a C5 a little bit, and when you guys were first sort of conceiving of what you wanted this car to be, how close did those first 97s that came out, the first C5s that existed, how close were they to your sort of original roadmap? When you sort of shifted out of the conceptual phase into the, okay, here's what we can actually build. How close did you get it to your target?
I think it came out really, really close. Like you go into it with packaging goals, with how you're going to package people and what the luggage capacity is going to be and all those kind of things, how comfortable it's going to be for the driver. You kind of package around all that kind of stuff. But we had structural goals that the structural tunnel and the hydroform side rails enabled. We met those structural goals right from the ones we had right from the beginning. We met them all. You look at weight distribution. Some of the things that came along to get the weight distribution where we wanted it was putting the transmission in the back. We wanted more. If you've driven enough C4s, you know that the area where you put your feet in the tunnel, the engine's offset to one side.
Shifted a little bit.
Kind of tight, and it's kind of tight there, so we wanted to improve that. The way to improve it had to be to move the engine a little bit forward from where the C4 is, so now you're losing weight distribution. I can remember going through that at a meeting, talking about that, and I said, what if we took the transmission and put it back here, like a 928, which we had. That was the other cars we had too. 928 was a car that we used. So do the transmission back here, and then that takes care, it doesn't get the weight in the middle where you might like it to, but it keeps your front and rear weight balance a lot better. So that was a big enabler. So I'd say the big enablers, the structural tunnel, hydroform rails, transmission in the rear, all of that really enabled everything else, and then it's just really putting the nuts and bolts together to get everything working right, and that really enabled it and made the car come out pretty damn close to what we planned on it being.
Did you know there was this LS engine coming for it? How far along the development process did you know there was this all-new engine?
Yeah, there was an all-new engine planned for it, pretty much. Not necessarily from the start, because if you looked at the real roots of the C5, you're probably looking at the late 80s. But by 92, we knew there was a new engine. The program was being put together with this new engine.
And did
Because
you?
they already had a plan, to
Yeah.
do this engine for all the trucks and everything too.
Did everybody know it was going to be as good as it turned out to be? I mean, the whole LS series just seems to be.
Well, the small block from the start has been a pretty good engine.
Yeah.
So you had the same kind of people working and all that knowledge passing down all the way through.
And the same general architecture.
Yeah, same general architecture, but jumping into that aluminum engine with the way the structure was done from the pan all the way up, with the structural pan, and dropping the rails of the case down so that the crank was kind of up inside gives you a lot of structure for the crank. So those were all big enablers, but you went away from the head being having the Siamese ports in the middle to being an even ported head. Allow it to breathe.
And it's tiny too.
And it's tiny and it's light.
I mean, when I, especially having just come from working on a Mustang for a few years, and opening that hood and seeing that big Coyote motor.
Well, if you look at the Coyote motors, well, you look at a BMW.
Yeah.
You open the hood on a BMW V8 and you go, oh my God, it's huge.
Yeah.
But it's the small block is one, it's tiny, and when this engine came out, obviously there's people who are really into technology who say, why did you do a double over cam? You've got to do this. So you're coming up with all the reasons why you didn't do it, which are good reasons. One, for one thing, it's incredibly inexpensive.
Yeah.
It's very simple, not as many parts. It's a low CG. It's very small for the volume. I mean, you look at, basically 400 cubic inch engines. Look at LS7s,
Yeah.
426s that are still small block size. In that package, it was a wreck. I mean, there was nothing better. You didn't have that kind of displacement in that size engine anywhere else in the world.
And anybody that's ever changed a cam timing belt on an Audi V8 is gonna say, why did they ever invent this?
And then you look at the LS7.
Yeah.
The LS7 is the lightest small block ever built. So it's not only the most powerful naturally aspirated, but it's the lightest one ever built too. And it's no bigger. No bigger than the 5.3s or the 4.8s.
Yeah. So with these cars, what were, you had goals obviously of structure and stiffness and performance wise though, what were some of your were you looking at absolute numbers for some of these performance targets?
Well,
or were you just looking at a class of cars and saying we want to be mentioned in there? Because I think the big jump between the C4 and the C5 is C4 is a great American performance car. The C5 is a world-class performance car.
It's almost everything comes down to numbers. You can have subjective things, but it's hard to sell. How do you market and advertise on subjective stuff? You've got to have numbers that you meet. So certainly you had numbers. You had all the things you'd normally expect, all the acceleration numbers from 0 to 60s and quarter miles and top speed and that kind of thing. You have handling numbers with G's and cornering G's. You have stopping distances. So you have more damn numbers than you could ever hope to do anything with, but that's what you engineer to, is going after those. But at the same time, as a development manager especially, what you're doing is you're trying to integrate all these things into making it something that the driver's really going to like to drive. So all those numbers are one thing, but it all comes down to what's it feel like when you drive it. So that's what you're working on, yet what you're talking about every day is meeting the numbers,
Right.
The weight, the structure, all those numbers that you're trying to get to.
And in trying to meet those, we had a question earlier about how restricted were you by the bean counters of the marketing department. But from our conversations earlier, it sounds like these programs were given a lot of autonomy and a lot of direction came from the engineering and performance side. And you told them, we're building this. You guys figure out how to sell it. But it sounds like they trusted you. And they let you build what you wanted to build and what was going to work. Yeah,
of course you always have cost targets.
Yeah.
There's cost targets and there's price targets that marketing wants to price it to, and from those prices you roll down to what the price or cost of all the parts is going to be. So you have all that kind of stuff, but still you're working to, not just save money, but you're trying to do it efficiently. You're trying to put the money where it really is important.
So if looking back at these cars, is there anything you look at one of these today and you go, oh God, I can't look at that because I wanted to do that different, or you know, I don't want to use the word regrets, but is there anything you would sort of hope to work in there that wasn't going to be feasible, or you'd like to take another shot at?
What would you guess would be my number one thing?
Well, the seats would be my number one thing. Yeah.
Absolute number one. Absolute number one would be a better seat.
Okay.
Yeah, no doubt in my mind.
I mean, what's the deal with the seat? What happened?
I spent little time on that, but I knew it was going on, and every time I drive the car, I go, this seat sucks. That's all there is to it. The C4 had a good seat.
C4 had great seats.
C4 had good seats, and here we go to this. Now the C4 seat was heavy, and so you're trying to. I think what was going on was they were trying to, and I don't even know about the frame and adjuster and that kind of thing, but I think they were trying to use carryover stuff from high volume cars and make it work. And the thought was that the engineers would be able to stiffen it and do those kinds of things to make it better. And
so that was. We'll let the engineers worry about it.
And it never worked out.
But then, what was behind?
So that would be number one.
What was behind the decision to not put the sport seats even in the Z06? Was it just purely a weight thing? Was
a better sport seat? Because we never. Well, there weren't any sport seats, were there at that time?
I think. Oh, did they come along later?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, at that time it was just, what can we do? Can we stiffen because there wasn't a seat program going on. The seat program is a pretty big program. It might surprise you to know that.
Yeah. Oh,
that
no.
There's a lot going on there to make the seat right, but there just wasn't a priority put on it. I'd have to talk to my friend Dave Hill about that. Dave, why didn't you put more priority on seats? I mean, Dave was an awesome engineer, and he put a lot of priority on a lot of things, but the seat wasn't one of them.
Yeah. Interesting. So, what was next after Corvette? You went on. I mean, you had a big hand in the development of, like we said before, the Solstice.
Well, I went really went from Corvette to the Camaro Firebird, and then on to high performance vehicles. Okay. So there was an initiative that was being developed at GM to start a high performance group who would do the high performance niche vehicles that we needed. And the idea was to have a group where it would really push the bounds of powertrain from what they've been doing, and really push the bounds on the vehicle side of what they've been doing performance wise, and get those into production. And so that's really what my charge was when I started up with that group, is to push the bounds in performance engineering for both powertrain and vehicle. And that's then where we headed. And we didn't have a lot of time to do it because everybody was so far ahead of us.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the Europeans, which was where the big emphasis was competitive wise, if you looked at the sedans, it was Audi, BMW, Mercedes. If you looked at performance cars, it was Porsche. Sports cars, it's Porsche and Ferrari. That's really where the push was. We've got to get there, and we've got to do it fast.
And it was interesting, you were telling me before, we were talking about the Solstice. We think of the Solstice as this sort of Miata alternative, mm-hmm. but you said when you developed the ZOK package, that was developed to win showroom stock races,
right?
Basically,
it was basically there for that, and I could tell you a story about that too if we take time. I don't think it'll take me too long, but the guy, the way we were organized, we had vehicle line executives and assistant executives, and they would have a vehicle line, and they would be responsible for doing that vehicle line. And I knew the guy who was doing the Solstice at the time, and I was, because the car was an obvious platform that you could do a high performance vehicle on, I was pushing that I could do this high performance vehicle for him. And he got excited about it because he was worried that the car wouldn't have a pedigree. He was really worried that we'd bring the Solstice out, and if it's going to be successful, it's got to have some kind of pedigree. So when I told him that I could do a racing version of it that I thought could win national championships, he was all over it.
Wow.
He was our biggest supporter. So he made it, kind of paved the path for us to be able to do that. And it's ZOK in both the base car and the turbo.
And it's so exciting to hear about that, because you're talking about General Motors. You're talking about one of the largest companies in the world. It's not, Lotus trying to build a Ringer showroom stock car. It's General Motors trying to build a Ringer to win at the runoffs, which I think is very, very cool.
And I tell you something that I don't know if I've ever told anybody outside of GM this either.
Well, it's not like they're going to fire you, John.
I had a goal. Yeah, they're not going to fire me. But I had a goal. I think it was in 2006. When did the GXP come out?
That would have been 06 or 07.
Yeah, so I think it was 06 with the ZOK turbo. Anyway, in that year, I had a goal for our team that we were going to have a production car, that would be capable of winning the runoffs in every class of touring and showroom stock.
Oh, wow.
Everything from T1 down to SSC. And at the end of the year, at the runoffs there, we won every single class except for T3, which I was running with the Cobalt, and I was leading it, and I got disqualified for noise. And so at the end of the year, we won 5 of them instead of 6 of them.
Wow.
But we won, I think we had Cobalt in SSC, then B was the Solstice, and T3 was the Cobalt Supercharged, and T2 was the Solstice Turbo, and then C5, C6. It was a C6 in T1. So we won them all except for that stupid noise canceling, noise disqualification.
So and you went on to do a lot of development work with the V-Series Cadillacs,
Right.
as well. So that had to be interesting, coming from a pure sports car, now going to a extremely fast luxury car. It still has, this Corvette obviously has a lot of emotional baggage attached to it and a lot of expectations. Cadillac has just as many, but are certainly different. So what were the goals like?
Well, you can, I mean, certainly when we came out with we started working on the first V, we had an Audi, we had an M3, we had an M5, we had an E55 as competitive cars, and the goal was to meet or beat every one of them. So we looked at we're gonna do everything we can to develop this car. We're gonna use the Nurburgring. We're gonna use the best powertrain we have at the time to put in the car. Do what we can with the chassis, with the tires, transmission, everything, brakes, the whole works, and get that car up to that kind of a level performance-wise. That was our goal. And we did the same thing with the next version of the V also.
Yeah, but even there were V cars like the XLRV, which is the spiritual successor to the X11, if you ask me, because it's such a niche specific car that you then take and throw this V package on. And I mean, I guess that's basically a C5 chassis with a North Star in it. Is that
right? Basically, yeah.
So how does a car? That's got to be a tough sell as an engineer, to take a car that's already a niche car and make it even more nichey. But it sounds like you just have a lot of trust.
Well, it was kind of when we started with the first V, the intent was it isn't just going to be a V; it's going to be a V-Series.
Okay.
And so Cadillac was looking at and planning out. We want a V in the XLR. We want a V on the STS. Short of going to what was their biggest one at the time? I can't remember, but
probably the
DTS,
Escalade.
The DTS,
okay.
The DTS.
Yeah.
Short of going there, so doing a V-Series was part of the plan all along, and so we were planning on one. There already was an XLR. Now we're going to do a V-Series, and you look at the goals for that car. Certainly weren't to go out and kick butt at the Nurburgring. That wasn't the goal for the car, but it was to be a kind of a gentleman's express Mercedes coupe kind of a car.
But so what's your fastest Nurburgring lap in a CTS-V?
In the CTS-V, the first one was 7:59 something.
Oh, wow.
7:59:32.
So coming real close to this car.
Yeah. It was about 2 seconds slower than this car, I think. And at the time, that was a record for a sedan at the ring.
Wow.
So no sedan, no two-wheel drive sedan had ever gone that fast at the ring before.
Holy cow. So you retired in 08 officially, but you're still one of the busiest guys I know. What are you officially doing today? I mean,
Well, officially. I have my own consulting business.
Okay.
I'm still doing work on that. So I do work in racing. I do work for automotive companies. I do a lot of expert witness things, like accident reconstruction kinds of things. also trade secret infringement, patent infringement,
Wow.
kinds of things. And virtually, I don't think there's been any that isn't automotive related.
Yeah,
So that
because
kind
you
of
have the background both in the engineering and the dynamics aspect of it,
Yeah.
and the hands-on dynamic aspect.
I still do quite a bit of racing,
Yeah.
still doing that. Still planning on club racing this year, maybe as many as 3 classes. So I'm looking
wow.
at a sedan again, and running a Camaro, in doing some possibly T2, but also Trans Am with the Camaro. And then I'm actually looking at running a Mustang in T3. And that one's getting pretty close to being serious.
Wow, that's cool. So, yeah, I was going to ask you. Somebody asked what your daily driver was, but you drove here in a brand new Grand Sport.
Yeah, my Grand Sport is
a car you own.
It may not be my daily driver, but when it's warm out, it's my daily driver. But it's actually, I've had it for a year, and it's only got 3,500 miles on it.
Oh, wow.
And a lot of that is track stuff and autocrossing. And so daily driver, believe it or not, most of the time I'm in a 2008 Equinox with 130,000 miles on it.
Wow.
And I'm kind of big on keeping cars working. As long as they work, I like to keep them going and keep doing that.
So now that you're not working for GM anymore, and obviously you're driving a Mustang, what I got to know is what's out there that you didn't design that you look at and go, boy, I wish I had a crack at that thing, or I really envy that. I mean, is there any?
Are you talking about from GM or anything at all?
What are you a fan of out there that anybody's building that you just kind of respect quite a bit?
Well, it's hard not to respect the Europeans with Porsches and things like that. You look at cars like GT3 RSs and things like that, even though they're rear engine cars. So here's Porsche working on a car that has a significant compromise. And look at what Corvette has done, or Porsche has done with a car that really has a significant compromise, which is the engine hanging way out the back.
Yeah.
So that's an engineering challenge to make a car out of that Porsche has done. So they've done some pretty amazing things. But since I've always worked in a high volume kind of company, we've never had those kind of resources to work where you're not as focused. Like they're focused on a real low volume, high dollar performance vehicle, and at GM you're working on cars that you don't have that kind of money to work with. So it's almost more fun to compete against the people who have everything to work with and have to do it with less money. Resources though, GM, it's hard for me to think about working on something else when you think about the resources you have at GM to work on. The engineers are just super talented. Never a tool that you wanted that you couldn't get. I mean, if you needed a tool to do your job, you got it.
And you're not talking about a socket. You're talking about a CNC machine that can create a car from scratch.
Or you're talking about a $10 million tire facility, or an 8-post rig in the lab or something like that. If you needed it, you got it.
Yeah.
And so it's hard to beat anything like that.
A couple questions to wrap up quick before we go. Oh yeah, we had somebody. Their Sierra Denali just turned 326,000 miles, and he just won up the guy whose Yukon turned 306,000. Yeah, these LS motors are phenomenal. Somebody wanted to know about the XLR a little bit more. How did that come to exist? When did Cadillac decide that they needed a sports car?
Oh, I'm having trouble remembering when those happened. When did the first XLR come out even?
So that would have been 07, 8, 9.
Was it that late, the first one? No, the XLR was more like 2004 or something.
Were they that early? Were they still being... Okay, yeah, that's right. They crossed over with the end of the C4, the C5, I think.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I think it was right in there. But Cadillac was very interested, and I tell you, Dave Hill, having come from Cadillac, was extremely interested in doing that too. So Dave Hill was a big seller from the engineering side of it, that he could do something like that. So Dave Hill had a lot to do with that, and Cadillac was very interested in having, they always have felt like they needed something again to be their mark, something that they could have all the cars kind of aspire to something. So that was like the top of the heap for them. And they've wanted mid-engine cars. I actually worked on a mid-engine car for Cadillac back quite a while ago. This would have been, remember the show car, the mid-engine show car back in early 2000s?
Oh yeah.
What was it called? I can't remember.
Yeah, it was when they were just first starting out in like ALMS racing too.
Yeah,
Then-
back in that time
yeah.
frame. Yeah, so they
Or
had
World
this,
Sports Car
they
at
had
the time, I
the
guess.
CN.
That's
The
right.
Cadillac, beautiful car. So I worked on that as a potential for a production car for a while too.
Yeah. Okay, so we'll end with this then. That's a good segue. Talking about mid-engine cars, it looks like we are on the sunrise of a mid-engine
I'm totally
Corvette.
not on the inside of that at all. I don't ever ask anybody any questions about it or anything like that. But I think there's going to be one.
That's fine. How do you feel about that as a guy who has lived in a world with nothing but front-engine, rear-drive Corvettes?
Well, I could tell you that I think there's still a lot to be had out of the rear-wheel drive. You know, there's still a lot of front-engine, rear-wheel drive. There's still a lot to be had out of that car. But the mid-engine, you're always working with a compromise there because the competitors aren't working with that. They've got mid-engine cars or rear-engine cars. But so there's always been that part that you can't quite get to. So you're trying to do it with a front-engine car, but
Physics is just
you just can't quite get there, and you're getting awfully close. But the mid-engine is really what gets you that next step. And it, you know, not only does it give you the mid-engine, but it enables things. It enables an easier way to hybrids. It enables, so you can imagine all-wheel drive electric.
going to have to be, in your mind, to be a Corvette? I mean, we have this sort of paradigm of what a Corvette is.
Well, certainly
and
there's heritage in the appearance. So there's going to be things in the appearance. There's got to be things in the appearance that kind of harken to a Corvette and make you look at it and say, yeah, that's a Corvette. But there's also this, what I think of as this usability that there is in a Corvette. If you take a car like this, a car like the C6 hatchbacks, I mean, you have no problem with a couple getting into a car and throwing luggage in that car and going a 2-week trip. It's roomy enough to do that. It's comfortable enough to do that. So I only hope that the people at GM are paying attention to that now, that they don't leave that behind. And there's still a value there too that I think you've got to look at the customers. Certainly the people who buy ZR1 Corvettes that pay $110,000 or $120,000 for a car aren't the same blue-collar people that could buy a car at one time, but they still aren't people who are necessarily going around buying $500,000 Ferraris and things like that too. So you've got to pay attention to the value, and I'm sure they will.
So we got somebody that owes you a bottle of bourbon and wants to know what your favorite kind is.
I like Maker's Mark 46 right now really well. That's pretty good.
And accessible and easy.
Yeah.
And so we'll reach that. What's your favorite Corvette?
Oh boy, that's hard to it. You know what? I kind of have a favorite one. If you look at every generation of Corvette, there's a favorite one. So I can't come up with them because I always like the newer ones. I'm one. I have no problem jumping into a C7 and say, okay, C7 is it. That's it now. And I love the C7 Grand Sport, but so I'd say right now in the C7, it's a C7 Grand Sport. If you look at a C6, it'd be the Carbon Z06. Okay. Awesome. Have you ever driven one of those? They're incredible. Just incredible.
I don't think
The Carbon Z06 had all the carbon fiber stuff from the ZR1.
Okay, so it had like the floor
and the aluminum frame.
Okay.
So all of that on the Z06, and it came with ceramic brakes, had some aero stuff, and it had beautiful colors and graphics on it. It was the car, and it's light.
Yeah.
You know, with the LS7 naturally aspirated. So that would be it on the C7, Z06 on the C5, no doubt.
Yeah, the value that these cars represent right now is unbelievable.
Yeah, and I still love driving these cars. It's every time I get back in one of these, and I don't get in them as often as I want, but I get back in one and I say, wow, I know why I like this car.
Yeah.
It's the most nimble Corvette I think that we've ever built. Most nimble, a little bit shorter wheelbase. It's very lively when you drive it. Just has a lot of life. And you look at it, I mean, when I was out, I autocrossed the hell out of these, and usually when I'd weigh them before I went to autocross, because I'm the kind of guy who goes to an autocross and I'm scaling my car, and all that kind of stuff before I go. 3,040, 3,050 pounds.
It's not much carb. Yeah,
no.
It's fantastic. And you were telling me that one of the problems that I'm having sort of adapting to this car coming from the Mustang is the throttle is very sort of non-linear. You're actually telling me that when you turn the electronic assists off, it actually sort of calms the throttle down.
Yeah, it makes it more linear.
Yeah.
Right.
So
Yeah, that's it's sometimes counterintuitive, but it's the kind of thing we tried to pay attention to in developing the car to make it easy to drive
Yeah.
for the person when they got on the track. Not make it hard, make it easy.
Awesome. John Heinricy, thank you very much for
Thank you.
being here. We appreciate it. Thanks for designing a fantastic car for us. We appreciate this thing every time we get it out there. And when we think about what these are worth today, they're not going to be this cheap forever.
Right.
So this is the time, I think, to get into a C5Z especially.
I think I've owned 7 or 8 of them
Yeah.
since the very first one came out.
Yeah. So
385 horse.
Nice,
One other
nice
note
work,
I want to make
Oh, yeah.
though before I leave, when we did the high performance vehicles like the V's and the Cobalts and all that, every one of them had a good seat in it.
I'm glad I'm not alone. You can look in there and see all of my various straps and bars that I've tried to rig
Yeah.
up to keep myself in there, and I'm the poor speaker grate over on this side is just caved in from my knee now.
Yeah. So you got to wear a knee pad.
Yeah.
You got to get yourself a knee pad
So-
and a G-lock for the belt.
Yeah. All right, guys, we are going to get out of here. So, yeah, huge. Oh, last question. Favorite racetrack in the world?
Oh, it's hard to beat the Nurburgring
Yeah.
if you call that a racetrack.
Yeah.
Otherwise, the Spa.
Okay. Not Sebring?
I tell you, in the U.S., Road Atlanta, Mid-Ohio, those are awesome tracks.
We're lucky on the East Coast. We have so many
BIR,
great tracks.
BIR, how can you get much better than the BIR
Yeah.
in the U.S.? I mean, that's awesome track.
Awesome. All right, folks, that is it for this week. Thanks very much to John Heinricy for being here. Thanks to all of you for watching. What a fantastic night. Join us at Daytona next week if you've got one of our grassroots packages. We can't wait to see you. If you don't have one of our grassroots packages, we can't wait to see you either. Come by the tent, come hang out. We always have special guests. We always have project cars hanging around, cool stuff going on. Check out our friends at crcindustries.com and our other friends at autobooks.aerobooks.com. Buy that Pete Brock book that is personally recommended by our friend John Heinricy. And heinrocket.com. You can check out John's website, all the stuff he's doing, his consulting business, and cool stuff going on there. We'll throw up a link to that if you want to see what's up with him, or just show up at an autocross in Detroit sometime during the summer and you'll probably see him hanging out in a Corvette. That's it for us tonight. We'll see you again next week with Mr. Hayward Wagner from the Sports Car Club of America. Join us for some updates. Great stuff coming up from Daytona as well. During the Rolex, we'll have live coverage from the Rolex. And it's time to go get warm. Folks, I'm JG Pasterjack. Good night, everybody. We'll see you again next week on another edition of Grassroots Motorsports Live, presented by CRC Industries. Thanks for watching. And go Jags.
Okay, do you have one?